to the Wealthy Living podcast. I'm Lisa, your host and founder of Wealthy Living. It's here that I connect with a variety of wonderful humans to have inspiring and insightful conversations to help you live a meaningful, connected, and well life. A place to learn and grow in confidence and clarity, and to make choices that support your well-being both personally and professionally. Today, I have a special guest, Lara Khalaf, to have a conversation about women's empowerment and sustainable success. So hard work, determination, and love are three main qualities that most define Lara's career and life accomplishments to date. She was raised between Syria and Spain, and she currently lives in London. Despite having a degree in literature, her love is people leadership, where she has spent more than 20 years managing large teams, operations across organisations in the private, corporate and public sectors. After leaving that type of employment, she set up her women's empowerment firm to develop and transform women's leadership, both personal and with teams, in a conscious, confident and feminine way, focusing on three key aspects: self-leadership, business leadership, and team leadership. Lara has co-founded Women 5.0, a platform to help raise consciousness in the world through having more peace, beauty, and possibility. Amongst other accomplishments, Lara has developed a TEDx talk, which is I'll put the link up and you've got to watch it because it's so different, so fascinating. And yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that after. She speaks internationally on the topic of leadership and is part of a very well-known Psychologies magazine coach directory. To give back, Lara has mentored refugees and non-refugees, supporting them to lead a more positive and empowered life. Lara is also an advocate for women's rights. So welcome, Lara.
Thank you. Can you repeat the whole thing again? It was good to listen to it.
No problem. I'll do that when we finish. Or just, maybe just out loud, say it to yourself sometimes.
Thank you.
So I want to talk with you today about women and power and what prevents women from connecting with their inner power source and the impact outsourcing their power has on their sustainable success, and then ways to help women access their power more easily. But before we get to that, I want you to just share a little bit with the listeners about your life story and how you became so invested in women's leadership.
Thank you. I was born in Syria and to a Middle Eastern father and Spanish mother. And I was about 14 years old when my parents decided to move to Madrid. And I guess now it was the right decision looking back. And so that was the first move where I changed countries, I changed friends, I changed language. I had very limited knowledge of Spanish, but we embarked straight into the educational system back then. So that was the first big change that I had in my life. And then I did my studies there, and because I've been wearing the shy label for years and years and years. So my family decided that maybe I should support the family business. So I'd come out of my shell and become a bit more sociable person. And that's how I started in business at the age of 16.
Wow.
Supporting the family business during school holidays and summertime. And that's how I started acquiring these invaluable leadership skills, and my dad becoming my first business mentor. And after finishing university, I decided to move to the UK. The truth, actually, looking back, maybe is because not only I needed an adventure, but also I wanted to escape. I don't know what I wanted to escape from, but I just had that great sensation and feeling. So I came to the UK. I had a few challenges. The first one is that I didn't know anybody. I spoke very little English. I only knew how to say a few words in English. And I always crack the joke just in case, once I tell you, you'll understand what the joke is all about. Because one of the things that I only knew how to say, I love you. you
Ah.
know. So I was hoping that I could use it one day in my life, you know. and and I'm still waiting, you know. So maybe I'm hoping that you know, next Valentine's is around the corner, so maybe we could put it in good use. And so um, my job, I started from scratch in the UK. I started working in fish and chips, despite the fact that I already had business experience and I was already leading teams in Spain. But I started from scratch working in a fish and chips restaurant. And until I did that for a few years, until finally I broke through and I had a proper job where I did not have to walk to work and I could finally afford taking the bus to get to work. And literally every 6 to 8 months I was getting a promotion after promotion, until the operations director of the organization said, Lara, I'm leaving and I want you to go for the job. And I'm like, are you crazy, man? You know, this doesn't work like that. I wasn't told that this is how it works, because I'm supposed, you know, to be not only a woman, but I'm not from the country and I don't speak the language. So, you know, this is not what I've been told. But I went for the job and I got it. And that was my first big business breakthrough in the UK. And that was the beginning of my corporate life here in the UK.
Wow. So then what led you to go from the corporate life to to move away from that and really venture into women in leadership?
Yeah. Well, it was approximately 4 or 5 years ago, you know, when something in your heart is telling you that it's time to move on. And that's exactly, you know, I just listened to it without really knowing what I was listening to. So that's what happened. I started digging deep. I remember reading a book back then by Robin Sharma called The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. And I attributed that book, the changes, the massive changes that came to my life. So I remember buying the book. You know, I got like 15 copies of the book. I was giving them to people. Hey, the book is going to change your life. This book is going to change your life. And I didn't see the reaction in people as I hoped. And I realized that obviously there's no book that can change your life, but it's you, that you are ready for that. Absolutely. So why women in leadership? I've been in the industry without me realizing for more than 15 years. And in fact, I remember that one of my first public speaking jobs back then, when I was working for a governmental department in Madrid, it was to support women. So, and I forgot about that. I forgot until, you know, I started digging into old memories, and I realized that actually my career didn't start recently. It started way before I thought. And why did I come out of employment? It was the right time. Employment is not for everybody. It was for me until a certain stage of my life, and until it was time to move on. And the reason that I specialize in leadership is because I've seen the ugly, the beauty, the super ugly of people leadership. And I realized that leadership is a massive, massive responsibility, and it's not for everybody. Yeah. And because of that, my mission, my vocation, my focus is to have open conversation about what leadership is all about. And if leadership is for you, especially when it comes to, I'm talking about people leadership, because when it comes to leadership, I think we're all leaders, regardless if we have a title or not.
Yeah. So what do you see leadership meaning? Like, what is leadership to you?
Responsibility.
Yeah. And responsibility. And when you say responsibility, do you mean responsibility to the people that you particularly lead and manage, or are you talking greater responsibility?
I think both. One of my philosophies is that leadership is not about you, but it starts with you. And what I mean by that is we have to look at ourselves in the mirror before we show up in business, especially when we have 10,000 people looking up to us, and the conversations, our decisions, our way of approaching business is going to affect greatly the lives of those people in a positive and not so positive way. So this is what I mean by responsibility. It's leaders. I mean, how many times have we met people that shouldn't be in those leadership positions, right? I mean, a few names come to my mind right now.
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean. That's what I mean by that. It's um, also before we lead others, we have to lead ourselves. So it's a big job.
Yeah, absolutely. And like for me, a lot of my real beliefs, and I've written quite a bit on it and said it, many times with clients, is that everything really does begin with self, and it doesn't really matter what you're doing or whether it's the way you relate to others or the way you lead others. We have to really work on ourselves, and it's about the key to success in whatever we do is about self-awareness and self-knowledge, and really getting to know what that actually means. What are our triggers? How do people respond to us? And, what is our personality? Are we doing like you changed, like you said before, from moving to the corporate world to doing what you do now because there was an inner calling. And if you weren't connected to yourself, then you wouldn't have heard that voice.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Correct, absolutely.
So yeah, I 100% agree that success really does begin with self and really getting to know our inner world first. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm totally on board there. So that's great. Now I'm just wondering, I think that it'd be really good to talk about women and what you've seen, what I've seen, and our own personal experiences of the way that women tend to often give away their power and are not necessarily comfortable really owning their own power. So I've witnessed, as well as really experienced, one of the reasons that a lot of women give away their power is that addiction to approval and people pleasing and belonging. And I know you have a story around that with your own family and your culture. And I wondered if maybe you can share a little bit about your experience around those reasons of women giving away their power.
Yeah, wow, thank you so much for that. Beautiful question. I came to the conclusion a little while ago. Now, let's go back a step, right? And let's talk openly about this whole women's empowerment, right? I mean, we hear a lot about women's empowerment, and this is, of course, has nothing to do with the men that we love and adore so much, and so many of them actually want to support us, and so many of them don't know how to support us. That is a different story. So when it comes to women empowerment, for me, it's about conquering our own world. And what I came to the conclusion is that an unhealed woman is a disempowered woman. Mm-hmm. An unhealed woman leader is a disempowered woman leader. So when we link this to our earlier conversation about leadership start with us, we have to dig as deep as we can. I mean, let's say for instance, I'll give you a story, right? A story that just came to my mind. And I learned this from one of the great teachers are out there. And it was saying that the ego, or who we are, is formed by what we have, what we do, and what other people think about us. Mm-hmm. There are also other influences too. So I come from an Arab world, our background, where what people think about you is a big deal. Mm-hmm. Plus there is this concept called aib. Aib means shame, right? Mm-hmm. So it's at the tip of our tongues all the time. If we do something is aib, if we don't do it is aib, if you speak here is aib, if you don't do it is aib, if you don't pursue certain things is aib, and if you pursue it, it might be aib too. So you constantly have this huge sense of inadequacy, and that you might be doing something wrong. Now, also because the education system, for example, and I'm speaking here firsthand, is that I remember, look, I was a very bad student when I was in Syria, very, very bad student. And I remember being compared all the time to certain family members or friends who were doing much greater at school. So did my family, and not necessarily my parents, but my surroundings, did they actually really mean by pushing me? They thought that by pushing me, they were helping me to do good. But what they didn't realize, it was actually quite the opposite. Because then since a very early age, I was developing I'm not good enough, right? Because I'm not getting the results I'm expected to get. And plus, because my dad is a surgeon, eye surgeon, I'm expecting to become a doctor. And actually, I had zero interest of becoming a doctor, right? Because who you are is what you do and what other people think about you. So I was growing with that feeling and sensation that I was not good enough. That was my own conclusion to things. So guess what happened then when it comes to business later on in life? I recall a conversation I had with my coach back in the days, about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And I remember I wanted to talk about burnout. I was so burnt out. I was working 12 hours a day. I was working 14 hours a day, sometimes weekend. And the conclusion behind the burnout, it had nothing to do with the long hours that I was working. It was to do with the fact that I wanted to make my parents feel proud about me, because I felt that I had let them down along the way. Now, when I realized that, I said, where is this coming from, right? So everything that I was doing so far, it wasn't for me, but because of the expectations that in this case, it was culture, had placed upon me. So cutting emotional cord with that was such a huge relief for me, because of course my parents are very proud of me, but for some bizarre reason along the way, I thought it wasn't the case, right?
Yeah.
So, and that was showing up in business big times. And this is one tiny example of things that happened, within me, and how I showed up as well in the way I led my teams, and of course with the stories that I hear, when I coach my ladies too.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. That's, it's really interesting. And I think that a lot of cultures have those same experiences. And I know that I do know a few people within the, the Arab cultures or the Middle Eastern cultures, or, lots of different cultures where that real addiction, that real need to be approved by your parents, and then doing everything you can to please them when it might not be your true path or what you really want to do, and that really can affect the way that you feel. It certainly doesn't allow you to be leading from a place and making choices from a place of your own inner power, and it's continuously externally referencing to make your decisions, and that is draining. And that's a great example of, and I never really thought of it like that, but that burnout, that is, I've thought about it, burnout can be led from your own personal decisions and your own emotional state, but really, yeah, exactly, like you're drained because you're doing something that isn't aligned for your personal values. Instead, you're adopting the values of somebody else.
Exactly, absolutely
true. So super interesting. Sorry, go on.
Also going back to, that's why, like, when it comes to people leadership, number one, I believe that we all leaders, right? All of us are leaders, and for some bizarre reason, women that don't have a formal leadership title, they don't believe they are. And may I say from here that every single woman, every single man, every single human being is a leader. We just need to reframe that word, right? Sometimes we think that leadership are those people that have responsibilities, or those boys, big boys and girls in the big organizations, and that is the difference, is responsibility. But we need to understand that we're all leaders. That's the first thing. And the second thing I forgot, so it's going to come back to me when I remember.
Oh, okay, no problem. Yeah, and that is true, because in the end, I suppose, especially now with all the, current world issues going on, we all are responsible, really. So we are all responsible for leading this world in some kind of, hopefully, good direction.
Yeah.
So that's what about I was also thinking of another area that comes into what a lot of women do, or what a lot of people do, but in this case we'll focus on the women because that's your area. What a lot of women do that disempowers them, I suppose, or doesn't allow them to really step in and lead with success, is having difficulty with boundaries. because I think that that's a really, really difficult thing for women. Men seem to be a lot especially in leadership and in when you're working in business, when you lead in a more, I suppose, masculine way, there's a lot more black and white, a lot more kind of structure, and this is the yes box, this is the no box, this is what I do, and rules and regulations. And women tend to blur those boundaries a lot more. And so from your experience, both personally and with working with women, where do you see boundary impacts women's ability to be successful in what they're doing?
Yes, thank you so much. And I think this is such an important topic. And I've also personally experienced the lack of boundaries until recently, despite having led hundreds of people at that stage, right? So it wasn't until recently, which is again very interesting, and it proves that actually learning never stops. Now, when it comes to boundaries, these are my own philosophies here. The first thing is like, how do I know when a boundary has been crossed? I mean, for me, if you were to ask me right now, Lara, what are your boundaries? I said, I'll tell you, actually, I don't know. And actually, do I need to know? No, I don't need to know. But what I know is, no, I don't need to know, because they're ever evolving. As I'm evolving as a human being, as a woman, as a leader, of course, they have to evolve with me. This is the first thing. The second thing is that I will know when they have been crossed. And the real deal is, how do I deal with it after I feel uncomfortable with it? And that is the work that needs to happen. Now, what I have realized, I have noticed, is most, if not all, and do you know what, I'm going to say all the situations are leading to the same place, and the place is lack of self-love. And I'm not talking about I love me, I wear makeup, or the self-care. I'm talking about deep self-love.
Yeah, I agree. Everything stems from the deep self-worth, that valuing of yourself. Which I suppose goes back to the beginning when I talked about, I suppose we talked about everything starting with self, and that to me is like your self-knowledge, your self-worth, valuing yourself, self-love. So all of those things is part of yourself and your awareness and your ability then to apply it in the situations that arise. Because I think that so much of the learning happens as we go, because we think we've mastered something, or we think we've healed something, and then something triggers us. And that's where, to me, the awareness comes in, like you said, those ever evolving boundaries or ways of behaving, because it's the triggers that are the goal to alert us that maybe something isn't healed, or there's more work to do on certain areas. So those so being self-aware enough is really the key to be able to identify when you're being triggered without reacting, and just really coming back to self. So I definitely think that it all does stem from self-worth.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you've mentioned the word triggers, and I love this word. I love it. I love it so much. And I tell my students, I tell my ladies, I tell my clients, triggers are gifts. You know, if somebody is pushing your button, say, bring it on. I need more of it, because that is the only way for me to know if something needs to be healed, if something needs to be looked at. And the words of one of my favorite teachers, Barbara DeAngelis, coming to mind. And her mantra says this: today I'm going to see what there is to see, to feel what there is to feel, and to know what there is to know. So I teach my students that whenever I have a trigger, instead of dismissing it, actually tell yourself, what do I need to see in this situation that I'm not seeing? What am I supposed to know that I'm not knowing, and what I'm supposed to be feeling? And in a world where I see a lot, especially in organizations and corporations, all about optimism, positivity, etc., we are dismissing so many times the beautiful spectrum of feelings that are there to be felt. So by having a mantra like this, imagine you self-coaching yourself all the time. What do I need to see in this situation that I'm not seeing, right? What do I need to feel? And when I'm open, and this comes from her work, the book Soul Shift, highly recommended. then imagine I'm just showing up from a place of I'm ready to learn and see that someone might be uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but I'm doing my best.
Yeah. And I think that, like you just said, the uncomfortable, I think that's what prevents a lot of people from doing that type of work, because it is uncomfortable. And most people are uncomfortable with the uncomfortable, as opposed to the goal of which is getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, or with discomfort. Yeah. So I think that that is what sort of takes people to making choices that aren't aligned, or be allowing the distractions to take place, because a lot of people don't want to sit in that discomfort because it doesn't feel good. So yeah, but without sitting in that discomfort, or at least really pushing the edges of it, then the growth is very limited.
And you know, and I really believe that that's the reason that a lot of people, you know, I have the metaphor of I wanting to go to the beach, and you know, you have this beautiful day and you've got this beautiful sea, and you want to get into the water, and you know, you put your little finger there and you're like, oh my god, it's cold, oh my god, you know, what do you do? Do you go back?
I run.
So sometimes some people run, but what would happen then when I decide to jump straight into it?
Yeah.
It's gonna feel uncomfortable until I get used to the temperature of the water. So this is personal development, right? It might feel uncomfortable, but once you are in it, if you really want to swim, you're gonna find a way.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, what's the Wim Hof method or whatever? The whole, have you heard of the Wim Hof? Like all the,
No.
oh, it's like the cold bathing stuff, and really going into the extreme of cold water, and really doing that to develop, I suppose, that resilience, and develop feeling good about discomfort, so that you can then, I suppose, have more resilience with discomfort in all areas of your life. Yeah. I mean, even
I have to check it out.
Yeah, definitely. Even talking about that whole triggers stuff that you were just talking about, and really becoming aware of, looking at where the learning happens with the triggers. I was just reading an article of a friend of mine who just wrote something quite different on imposter syndrome. So something that a lot of people suffer with, and that really another thing that really prevents people from sort of breaking the glass ceiling and, you know, becoming really successful, or leading in a way that, you know, really empowered leadership, is that imposter syndrome. And she was writing about it being, instead of fighting it, accepting it, that if you feel like you are being an imposter, instead of looking at oh no, this is just my inner critic and all of that, actually going, maybe I'm feeling that because maybe, is there an area that I am being an imposter? Like, what is actually being triggered? Am I putting out information that I have not really researched or haven't had experience with, and are just curating for, I suppose, without substance? Am I putting out marketing material which isn't really for the right reasons? You know, all these different things. And maybe, like triggers, imposter syndrome is just another one of those kind of, I suppose, triggers to go, well, if my mind's thinking that I'm that, maybe it's not just my inner critic, but I actually am being an imposter somewhere, and it's time for reflection. Like you said, keep stopping, keep pausing and reflecting on what is coming up, and then clear it, so that you can then make better choices going forward.
Do you know what? Thank you so much for this. We especially in our world, we hear a lot about imposter syndrome, but actually, yes. So, and what if I'm an imposter, right? So that's a question. But you know, so thank you so much for sharing that. One thing that was coming to my mind as I was listening to you is this whole concept of faking it until you're making it, right?
Yeah.
And I have a big issue with that. I do have a big issue with the word fake it altogether, right? That is related to imposter, because somehow is my philosophy that if we were to fake it all the time, then that could lead to that imposter. Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh,
Another way of looking at it.
all right. So we've talked about different things that hold women back, keep them stuck, possibly don't allow them to push through that glass ceiling, to disempower their ability to lead successfully. So what are ways that we can maybe help? What are ways to help women access their power? We've talked briefly about really connection to self and reflection and stopping, and we've talked a little bit about really being aware of the triggers and identifying what they mean and then making different choices. But is there anything else that you can think of that you work with women to help them access their real inner power more easily?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Like everything that we've been covering so far, it's inner work in order for me to show up from that place of divinity, from that place of love, from that place of wholeness, right? Now, there's other things that we need to be bearing in mind. Now, I don't know if you knew that according to the World Economic Forum, it's going to take 208 years for gender equality, 208 years for gender equality. Wow. So what do I mean? Why is this so important, this statistic? Because there are other circumstances that we need to bear in mind, and that is societal, that could be from a corporation's point of view, but I really believe that if we were to do the inner work to the best, we're going to start showing up from a different space. And when I think we need to be we need to be a little bit of activists here, so we start to close that gap of 280 years and we shrink it as much as possible, because that is insane just to think about it in today's age, right? So that we need to speak up more, and if something is not right, we have to join the movements. We have to speak up and challenge, and we could only do that once we also feel right. And one thing for sure, it's like when it comes to the feminist movement, it's very interesting that I've called myself a feminist all my life, because the essence of feminism is all about equality and fairness, right? Yeah. Which is as different as sameness. But it's to my surprise when I go to my seminars and I to my workshops, and I ask my ladies who in here consider themselves to be a feminist. Sometimes most of hands go up, but so many times not all hands go up. So actually it made me think about, what is it about the word feminism that some women are not connecting with? Is it because some men are not for equality, right? Or is it perhaps that there is a misconception about the word? Or is it perhaps because it's time to upgrade that word altogether? Right? Yeah. So the reason I'm mentioning this in this conversation, because when I've mentioned earlier on that we have to speak up and we need to do a bit of activism here, needs to come from a place of wholeness and a place of love, not from a place of anger or from a place of resentment, because that is my opinion, that maybe that was one of the reasons that the word feminism doesn't have such a great reputation overall, when the core essence of it's goodness and greatness, right? So once I do all the work and I show up from that space of higher self, then I need to have this conversation. I need to challenge the status quo, and I need to challenge organizations, and I need to challenge the boys clubs out there.
Yeah, totally. And I think that something that you really brought up in that, I mean, I totally agree with everything that you just said, but you know, the thing that really stood out for me is language, and how language really affects people's choices. So like you said, women didn't put their hand up, and I would say that it's not that those women don't believe in equality, because I mean that would be crazy, yeah, especially in a women's leadership workshop. However, I think it's the language and the words, and what words have become to mean based on, it's kind of like certain words have been trashed, or they've been misconstrued, skewed to mean something that they don't, and it's about either reclaiming the word or changing the word. And I think there's lots of words like that. I mean, I think that there's lots of words and lots of preconceived ideas that people have about words that really affect the way that we do things. And I think feminism is definitely one of those things. And it brings up a trigger in people. People are triggered by that word really badly. Yeah. And again, are they triggered by the word because they're not voicing? Are they triggered by the word because as a male, is a male triggered by the word because they're unhappy with the way that they're behaving? Like, there's lots of reasons I think people don't like to own words. But feminism is definitely one of those.
Yeah. I do not remember. I was I live between London and Madrid, and one of my trips to Madrid, I was walking down the street in my area that is, it's a residential area, and I saw in Spanish, feminism is hate. Going back to, is it? Or is it happen that some people, because of maybe open wounds and open and different influences, they've been showing up from that space? I don't know.
Yeah. So how do you then think that women can be like just unapologetically themselves and not make, and voice how they feel and be really authentic without making enemies, and instead making allies, people that are on their team, by doing that and being unapologetically themselves, whether it be in business or in life, in relationships, without feeling like they're making enemies. So going back a little bit, people pleasing stuff, we make decisions and we don't be authentically ourselves because we want to please the people or we want to belong somewhere. But how do we actually be ourselves, be authentic, and still feel like we belong, still feel like we're not making enemies and that we're actually making allies?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great question. Let me reflect on it. Let me reflect. What's coming to mind is that if I'm going to be losing some people along the way, that's what's coming to me. And I believe that as we start growing, and we talked earlier on about misalignment, right? A job will be in misalignment of who I am. Partners will be in disalignment. A friendship will be in disalignment. So some people naturally will just fade away. And then I wonder if I am attracting the right people into this movement and into these conversations. And then I wonder then if more women are not speaking up is because they are scared or they are, they have fear that are stopping them from having those conversations. And then I'm going to remind them of the 208 years. So I think that it's pretty shocking. And I don't want my niece, who is 1 year old, to still be dealing with some of the crap that we have been dealing with and some of my ladies have to deal with. And if not, we don't do anything, it's very much, she's going to be suffering the consequences of that too, right? Or the continuation of that. So going back to your question, I think that working in the women's, I only work with women, and whenever I get to a workshop, either for 6 people or 70 people or 100 people, it's unbelievable, and still is surreal to me and magical sometimes, the camaraderie and the space that gets created by the feminine, right? And I think we need it. I think we need that. Yeah. And this is, it's when we create these healing spaces that it's, in my opinion, the reason of these gatherings, right? We call it workshop, we call it event, but it's very much a healing space where we can be completely ourselves and talk about things that we need to heal first before we bring the masculine in, right? I don't know if I answered that question, but I think it's having courage. There's not even confidence anymore, having courage and to know why we're doing it and to we responsible, and as leaders, having a formal title or not, we have to continue with the work, and it's never ending. It's never ending until that we close that gap. And let's not forget something, that statistic, in fact, is for the USA, and I'm making an assumption here, that's also for the Western societies. So what's happening to our ladies in countries like the Middle East and Africa, where feminine mutilation, it's in order, or male guardianship is still legal, right? So we have to think about that too. So we owe it to everyone. And when a woman shows up, actually she is showing off for everyone else.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that one of the words that came to mind as you were speaking then, which could, when you said courage, I was thinking to myself, yeah, but how does someone have that courage, apart from, obviously once you've done the inner work and your self-worth and is in really good order, then you're going to have more courage. Once you have that inner power and you don't, I suppose, externally reference or care so much about what everybody else thinks, because you know and you're strong about your own truth, obviously you have more courage. But the other thing that really came to mind when you said courage was the word support popped in. And I think that that's a really important component of being able to have courage, to feel supported. And it might be supported from your family, it might be supported from your friends or your sister circles, or the women, the other women around you, or businesses, or having a mentor or a coach, or whatever the dynamic is. But when somebody feels supported, they tend to have more courage to be able to step forward, because it's like everything isn't on them, even though, it kind of is, but, you can't shift responsibility, but there's just that feeling of that you're not alone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you know what? Courage, like anything, it takes practice.
Yeah.
Right? It takes practice. Look, I remember when, I did the TEDx, and people would tell me, "Oh, Lara, you were so confident." I'm like, how? How? I've never done a TEDx before. I've never spoken to you in front of 1,000 people. If that goes wrong, it's going to stay in there for the rest of my life on YouTube, right? But what I had was courage. And because I have been putting and practicing courage throughout my life so much, then it's easy to do that. So courage, like anything, it needs to be mastered.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, that's the same, I suppose, courage and resilience. So that ability to have the courage and then have the resilience to be able to cope if it doesn't go to plan. And I think that both of those things are things that just don't happen overnight. You need to build them probably, all through your life, and have opportunities to be able to build them. So you're not going to build resilience if you always take the safe option.
Voila, exactly. So whenever, and again, of course, I never break any confidentiality with the conversations, with my ladies, but whenever there is a situation that my ladies need to improve, I pray and hope that they have that challenge so many times in between sessions, right? So that they can practice that as much as possible, because how else can I do it, right? How else if it's not through practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So just also looking at, I suppose, women and leadership and their ability to really be able to lead from an authentic place. Things like judgment and feedback and opinions of others, which we've touched lightly on, come in. And I wondered if especially leading women more in the business sense, feedback is extremely important, but how do you get women to decipher between judgment, opinions, and feedback?
Okay, how much time do we have?
We actually probably don't have any more time, but I like the conversation. Let's just keep going.
This is massive. And, when it comes to feedback, now, I say feedback, I take it with a pinch of salt. The fact that somebody has provided me with a piece of feedback, it's their opinion on the matter. So unless the person has, may I say that I admire and I respect whatever they have achieved, then I take it with a pinch of salt, because it's very much their opinion. And as a people leader, also looking back into some of the things that I've experienced in my life, also depended on my mood, right? So we take that with a pinch of salt. Having said that, that's why it's important to we'll look into it. I'm not discarding feedback. I'm not saying that all feedback is bad or anything, but again, I'll say, okay, that's your opinion, but ultimately it's your decision. Around that. And equally, and that's why it's important. I mean, when we run the workshop, actually there is an entire ton of module that we talk about how to provide feedback and how to have those conversations, because that piece of feedback coming from a space of fear or anger or resentment or burnout or all these things that sometimes, when we're running businesses and having big teams, is affecting the other person if they don't have that, the strength to look into it, and they look at the boss as if the boss said it, it means that it's right? So that is also part of the earlier conversation that we had when it comes to responsibility. To be very mindful on how we have those conversations with our people. What is the difference between opinion and judgment?
And feedback.
Oh my God. I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, the way that I see it, and again, it's just perspective. So it's just, again, it comes back to language and defining words, and everybody having different perception, I suppose, of what words mean. But to me, judgment has this really negative feel about it, and someone is actually like kind of, I don't know, it just has a negative feel about it. Opinion sort of sits in the middle, but feedback to me is something that is really important, and it does matter. And I think that whether you take on someone's feedback is obviously an individual choice, but hearing feedback I think can be really important, because although the key, like we said before, the key is self-awareness, the key is really getting to know yourself and then making decisions from that place that you are making conscious choices. But we can't always see everything. We can try to witness ourselves, but we can't always see everything and know that the way we might communicate something to someone else or a team member or a colleague or a boss or whatever, like we can't always be 100% sure that the way that we've communicated is the way that it's landed for that person. And so I think it's really important to take feedback and not be reactive with the feedback, but really, again, reflect on the feedback. And like you said, obviously then come to a point where you then can make your choice of whether you agree or you disagree with the feedback, and then make whatever choice you like. But I really feel that feedback is different than judgment. An opinion is just something that, a person's thoughts on a particular area. But I really think that feedback does matter, and that they do differ, and that there's different ways to navigate each of them.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And what was coming to my mind was something coming to my mind, and it will come back again.
Well, that's why I have a pen. Yeah, so I think that these are just important things that obviously we can have massive conversations on them, and then it can lead to a whole conversation on communication techniques and the way that we communicate with other people and how much that matters. But obviously we don't have time for that now. But I just think that bringing up the idea of the judgment or feedback and opinion is something that really can stifle our ability to lead and feel empowered in our leadership. And so that's why I thought it would be worth.
No, it's a big topic. And then when I'm providing that feedback, or I'm observing, am I doing it from a space of I'm gonna catch you, but then where is that coming from? That is most probably coming from a conversation or an impact that I've had in my childhood, or somebody's influence. So that's why it goes back to please take yourself development very, very, very seriously. And let me tell you something. I mean, that is a thought that was coming to my mind that earlier when I forgot, is that to accept that I'm going to do my best. I am doing my best. I mean, I'm a human being at the end of the day, and I am doing my best. Do you think that I haven't done something that potentially somebody is still, hating me for? I bet that is happening, right? Hate is a big word, right? But just for to illustrate the situation in terms of, I'm sure that I have made a decision that somebody was not happy with. I'm sure that I provided somebody with a piece of feedback that they still until now have been affected by it, whether I was aware of it or not. So it goes back to self-development. Please, we have to take it very seriously.
I agree that self-development leads to business development, and got to get your core. You can't just get your core business foundations right. You've got to get your core personal foundations solid in order to then, develop your business. And most of my work is really around that. Some people can come to me with business stuff, but if we don't work on your core personal foundations and your value system, then you're not going to make, everything affects everything. So yeah, I totally agree with that. And what did come to mind when you were just discussing that then about, the person that gives feedback, like what place are they coming from? I think that it comes then back to what you really said quite at the beginning, and that was self-responsibility. So everybody has self-responsibility to the way that we communicate, the way we give feedback, the way we receive feedback, and all of those things. So yeah, I think that a lot of things really do come back to self-responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So much thoughts.
We can continue. You and I can continue for hours here.
I know, this is the problem, but I do think that we need to start winding up. I do want to mention, and I don't want you to go into it in detail because people can watch it, but I think that it is important, and I love, and it's not necessarily on women in leadership so much, but your TEDx talk on the other side of Syria is just so interesting. And when you say that, how you feel when you say to someone, I'm from Syria, and I heard you say something like that you met with like empathy and sympathy and warmth and love, but you also really met with surprise and confusion and, whoa, what do you mean you're from Syria? Like, isn't Syria, and with all those stereotypes and preconceived ideas, and that just goes a lot on the same line of a lot of the things we've talked about preconceptions. So I really encourage people to go back. I'll put on the show notes and watch your talk because it's really interesting. It's great. Loved hearing it. So thank you
so much
making that talk.
Thank you.
So is there, before I wind up, is there anything else that you think that we haven't covered to do with women in leadership that you came in today's conversation with a preconceived idea that you wanted to discuss?
I think the beauty of this conversation, it became, very, very organically. Yes, we knew that we were going to talk about women and business and in leadership, and what came up, I think it's we're more beautiful than that. And it's a reminder that we all have responsibility. And one of my favorite quotes it says that she remembered who she was and the game changed. Yeah. She remembered who she was and the game changed. So I would like, to finish with that quote.
Yeah, fantastic. Love it. So thank you, Lara, for sharing your incredible insights today. I think you have an incredible story. It's really inspiring, and it's really aligned with so much that I do. It's been such a pleasure, and I love your vision and the way that you're bringing it to the world. Is there any, like, for people to find you and learn a little bit more about either your story or things that you offer or programs that you have, can you maybe just mention where they can do that?
Of course, with pleasure. If anyone, feels resonance or are connected with something that I've shared, I'm on social media, on Instagram and LinkedIn mainly, and on my website, larakhalaf.com.
Oh, fantastic. And I'll put all of that on the show notes as well. So thank you for listening to today's episode, and Lara and I would love to hear from you. So what's your biggest takeaway or insight from today's conversation? Leave a comment and let us know. And if you would like, as I said, more information on Lara, just go to her social media platforms or visit her website. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, please share it with your friends and consider subscribing to the Wealthy Living podcast on iTunes and even the Wealthy Living YouTube channel. so that you can listen to more conversations with wonderful humans whose stories, knowledge, actionable ideas, and wisdom can help you live a meaningful, connected, and well life, both personally and professionally. I'm Lisa. I'm an integrated life clarity and wellbeing coach, a workplace wellbeing consultant, a conversation facilitator, and an event creator and host. If you want to find out a little bit more about my services, you can visit my website at Wealthy Living, wellthy.com.au, or connect with me on any of my social media channels. Until next time, remember, connection is medicine.